7 outboards won't fail. They'll simply be turned away, still running strong, still starting on the first key, but suddenly not allowed where you launch. Here's the twist. Most owners don't know they're affected yet. As emissions rules tighten, documentation and fuel system compliance matter more than horsepower. And when that happens, certain models get flagged first, even if they run perfectly. By the end of this video, you'll know which outboards are most vulnerable in 2026, why performance favorites are quietly at risk, and what owners can still do before the rules fully bite. Number 7. Suzuki DF 350A. It is easy to admire a motor that delivers big horsepower without trying to act like a luxury product. The appeal is straightforward. Serious output, serious displacement, and a reputation for being a value play in the upper tier. On paper, it looks like the kind of thing that should fly off the floor. In the real world, it depends on where you are and what the local buyer pool trusts. The slow-moving story here is not a single scandal or one headline failure. It is the softer, quieter force that controls most big purchases: regional confidence. Some areas have deep support and lots of similar rigs running around, which makes the engine feel normal. Other areas do not, which makes it feel like a choice you have to justify. The moment a buyer feels they must justify, they hesitate. And hesitation is what turns a good engine into a slow sale. The DF 350A can also get caught in the comparison trap. Buyers in this horsepower class often cross-shop aggressively. They are not only comparing horsepower, they compare resale, reputation, dealer density, rigging ecosystems, and how easy it is to sell the boat later without a long explanation in the listing description. When a shopper believes a different badge will sell faster in their region, they push the price down, not because they hate the engine, but because they are pricing the perceived resale friction. And in a cautious market, perceived matters almost as much as real. Even if support is fine, if buyers think support is thinner, the market behaves as if it is. That is why you sometimes see these engines priced attractively and still sitting longer than expected. Buyers circle, bargain, and wait for someone else to take the first step. If you already know your local dealer is strong and you keep boats for a long time, the DF 350A can be a confident purchase. But if you are buying a setup that you will want to liquidate later, the local resale lane is the deciding factor. Great engine, but not always a fast sale. Sometimes the market does not punish a brand, it punishes a category. And once the price climbs high enough, even the most respected names become maybe later purchases instead of buy it now purchases. Number 6. Yamaha XTO Offshore 450. This is the kind of engine that looks like it belongs on a different class of boat. Big, purposeful, and designed around offshore seriousness. When someone wants the best and wants to tell themselves they are buying peace of mind, this is the direction their brain goes. The problem is that peace of mind is expensive, and expensive sells fastest only when buyers feel urgency. In a hotter market, premium offshore power moves because people fear missing the season. They fear waiting on inventory. They fear settling for less. In a cautious market, the same buyers become patient. They start thinking like they are buying property instead of buying propulsion. They compare entire packages. They hunt for incentives. They ask for extras, and they wait until the deal feels so safe it almost becomes boring. That patience stretches timelines, and stretched timelines create slow selling patterns, even for engines everyone agrees are top tier. The Yamaha XTO Offshore 450 gets pulled into this simply because it sits at the peak of a premium tier. People are not just paying for horsepower, they are paying for a vision, offshore confidence, status, and the sense that the engine was built for punishment. That vision works emotionally, right up until the buyer sees the full installed cost rigging, controls, steering, props, labor, and all the small pieces that do not look expensive until you add them up. Then, the emotional decision turns into a financial decision, and financial decisions love delay. There is also a silence problem that follows expensive outboards. Buyers do not always say what is really making them hesitate, because it feels rude. They will talk about price, or timing, or I just want to think about it, when what they mean is, if this goes sideways, the fix is going to hurt. Even if the engine is solid, The fear is not irrational, it is basic risk management. When an engine costs this much, the buyer does not only fear failure, they fear the calendar, they fear losing weeks of the best part of the season, while parts or service slots take their time. Another factor that quietly slows these sales is something sellers underestimate. Buyers at this level are not only shopping the engine, they are shopping the finishedness of the rig. They want to know the install is clean, the prop selection makes sense, the controls match the boat's use, and nothing about the setup feels like a personal experiment. If a listing raises even a small suspicion that the previous owner was still dialing it in, changing props, chasing a perfect number, adjusting height, fighting handling quirks, the buyer's brain goes defensive. Nobody wants to inherit a high-end project, especially not when they are paying high-end money. And many shoppers in this tier are not buying one engine. They are buying twins or triples. Multiply the cost, multiply the consequences, and even small doubts become big doubts. A person who would impulse buy a mid-range motor will not impulse buy a premium offshore package. They will think, call around, compare, and sleep on it. That is not lack of demand. That is demand behaving cautiously because the purchase is large enough to deserve caution. It also changes the negotiation dynamic. The higher the price, the more comfortable buyers feel asking for concessions. They want service plans, rigging discounts, prop swaps, extended coverage, dealer guarantees, anything that turns a scary purchase into a controlled purchase. If they cannot get that feeling of control, they wait. And waiting is what makes inventory sit. None of this means the XTO Offshore 450 is not desirable. It is desirable, and that is why it shows up on expensive boats in the first place. But desirability is not the same as liquidity. In a cautious market, the most expensive form of confidence can become the slowest to sell quickly. And once you understand how hesitation forms at the top end, you start noticing a very different kind of slow seller, one that is not slowed by price or complexity, but by a single quiet question buyers do not like to ask out loud. What kind of life has this engine already lived? Hit, like if you've ever seen a dream repower turn into a slow-selling headache. Subscribe for more grounded outboard truth. Now comment this. What's the most expensive peace of mind setup you've seen? Become a resale nightmare later flagship outboard, full rigging package, controls, or something else. Number 5. Mercury Racing 450R. It has a reputation that hits before the buyer even reads the listing. People associate it with speed, with status, with the kind of ownership that makes a boat feel like a statement. When someone buys this motor, they are rarely trying to be subtle. That is the appeal. It is also the trap. High-performance outboards do not live in the same world as mainstream engines. They have a smaller buyer pool, and that smaller pool behaves differently. The buyers who want them often know exactly what they are looking at. The buyers who do not want them often get spooked by the unknowns. Even if the engine has been cared for, shoppers wonder how it was used. Was it babied? Was it pushed hard? Was it propped aggressively? Was it tuned? Was it run at the edge of what it can do? Those questions do not mean the engine is unreliable. They mean the buyer cannot instantly assume normal use. And when a buyer cannot assume normal use, they protect themselves by walking away or demanding a discount. That is what slows sales. There is also the resale reality. If you buy a racing product because you love the identity, you might later find that identity is not shared by most shoppers. Many people want fast, but they want it in a package that feels mainstream and easy to service anywhere. A specialized performance engine can be perfectly serviceable, but it does not feel universal. It feels like a choice you must understand. The moment it feels like homework, the buyer pool shrinks again. So, the 450R becomes a classic right buyer engine. It sells quickly when the right buyer appears. It sits when the right buyer is not currently shopping. That is why it can be a slow mover. Not because it lacks demand, but because demand is concentrated in a smaller group that moves on its own schedule. Some engines are slow to sell because they are too expensive. Some because they are too niche. But the engines that create the longest comment wars are often the ones that mix premium price with complex behavior when something goes wrong. Number 4. Mercury Verado V12 600. At first glance, it looks like the ultimate solution: big cylinder prestige, smooth power, delivery, and the kind of premium identity that makes buyers feel like they are stepping into the future. It is easy to fall in love with the concept. Then the buyer starts thinking about the moments that do not show up in marketing. Flagship engines get judged by how they behave under stress, not just how they run when everything is perfect. Modern outboards can protect themselves in ways that feel smart to engineers and unsettling to owners. When people spend flagship money, they do not just want performance. They want predictability. They want the boat to feel boring in the best way. The Verado V12 600 can run into slow-selling territory because it carries the high-tech flagship reputation. Even when issues are addressed and service is available, buyers have heard enough stories about fault modes, warning systems, and complexity that they start asking who can diagnose it quickly. They are not only shopping the engine, they are shopping the service pipeline. They are shopping the technician who answers the phone. They are shopping the parts shelf behind the counter. This is the part that stays grounded. You do not need to claim the engine is doomed. You only need to understand buyer psychology. A buyer who is already paying premium prices will not accept "it is probably fine." They want "it is definitely supported." The more complex the engine appears, the more that buyer demands certainty. If they cannot get certainty, they pause, and pause turns into a listing that sits. This is also where resale becomes the silent killer. Some buyers love having the most advanced option. Other buyers see it as a future repair bill. When those two groups disagree, resale pricing gets messy, and messiness slows sales. The engine can be fantastic, but if the market is nervous, the sale slows down anyway. If you want to understand a market, watch what people hesitate to buy even when it is impressive. That hesitation usually signals the next twist, because in a cautious moment, some buyers do not run toward complexity. They run toward a different kind of new, and that kind of new has its own hesitation built in. Number 3. Mercury Avator 35E. Quiet can be seductive. Clean design can be persuasive. And for the right use case, electric propulsion can feel like the smartest upgrade a person ever made. That is exactly why this category is tricky. It is brilliant in the right lane and awkward in the wrong lane. The hesitation starts with routine. A traditional buyer understands fuel and range without thinking. An electric buyer has to imagine charging, storage, and how their day changes when the tank is a battery. None of that is complicated for a committed owner, but it is a mental barrier for shoppers. And mental barriers slow sales, even when the product is good. The Mercury Avator 35E looks like the future, and sometimes it is. But buyers still worry about what happens when the day does not go as planned. Wind, current, extra weight, longer runs than expected. These are not dramatic concerns. They are normal boating variables. And because electric is still unevenly adopted across the market, buyers also worry about the resale lane. They do not want to be the person who owns a system that only the right niche buyer understands later. So the outboard becomes a bet. Not a reckless bet, but a bet on lifestyle fit. The buyers who know it fits buy confidently. The buyers who are unsure do what cautious buyers always do. They wait. Waiting creates slow-selling inventory. This is where you have to stay honest. Electric outboards can be excellent. The trap is buying them as if they are the same kind of purchase as gasoline. They are not. They are a system choice. They require the buyer to be certain about the routine. And if the routine is uncertain, the purchase slows down. When a category divides buyers, the market becomes patchy. In one pocket, units move fast because the culture is ready. In another pocket, the same unit sits because the buyer base is not ready. That patchiness is the definition of a slow mover. And once you understand that, it becomes easier to see why a smaller electric, even from a trusted brand, can be an even harder sell. It is not just asking buyers to change their propulsion. It is asking them to rethink what simple means. Number 2. Yamaha Harmo 3.7 kilowatt electric outboard system. This is the kind of product that makes sense the moment you see it in the right environment. Quiet waterways, restricted zones, short distance use, precision control. It feels modern, it feels clean, and it feels like the direction the industry wants to move. Yet, it can still sit longer than expected, and the reason is not performance. The reason is buyer identity. People shopping small power often want one thing above all: effortless ownership. They want something they can throw in the garage, mount easily, run without thinking, and sell later, without writing a paragraph of explanation. A premium small electric system changes that story. It asks buyers to think about charging habits, battery care, and a different style of ownership that is perfectly reasonable but not instantly familiar. That unfamiliarity matters. The buyer pool for this size class is broad, and a broad buyer pool tends to favor the most universal solution. When a product feels like it belongs to a particular niche, shoppers hesitate even if they like it. They ask themselves whether their friends would understand it if they sold the boat. They ask whether the second owner will be excited or suspicious. They ask whether service and parts will feel as easy as a conventional option. So, the Harmo can become a slow mover in markets where the electric routine is not yet normal. It sells quickly when it matches the local culture and the local use case. It sits when buyers want a familiar answer to a familiar problem. This is not a complaint about the product. It is a reminder about how buying decisions actually work. People do not only buy what is good, they buy what feels socially and practically safe. In small engine territory, safe often means simple and familiar, and premium electric still feels new to a lot of shoppers. When buyers are uncertain, they do what humans always do: they postpone. And the longer the buyer base postpones, the more an otherwise smart product looks like a slow seller. Now, the list snaps back to a very different kind of controversy. Not new technology, not niche performance, but a name that can still spark loyalty and fear at the same time. And that emotional tension can turn a great running engine into a hard sell overnight. Number 1. Evinrude E-TEC Generation 2300. The story begins with admiration. People talk about torque, personality, and the feeling that these engines had a distinctive identity. Some owners will tell you they have had years of strong performance with no drama, and they will sound completely sincere. Then the buyer asks the one question that changes everything: what happens long term? When a brand stops producing new outboards, it changes how the market thinks, even if support still exists in different forms. Buyers do not want to feel like they are inheriting uncertainty. They want predictable service. They want predictable resale. They want to know that if something goes wrong, they are not entering a scavenger hunt. That is the trap with the E-TEC Generation 2300. The engine can be excellent for an owner who understands the landscape and is comfortable with it. But for a typical buyer scanning listings, discontinued becomes a shadow that never fully leaves. Even if parts are available, even if technicians can work on them, the buyer is forced to imagine a future where things might become harder, and market's price might. This is where speculation belongs. And it is responsible speculation. Some discontinued platforms become stable, classics with loyal followings. Others become harder to move with each passing year. The truth often sits in the messy middle. Plenty of engines run great, and a few stories travel far enough to shape perception anyway. Buyers do not need a statistical breakdown to hesitate. They only need to feel unsure. That uncertainty shrinks the buyer pool. And shrinking the buyer pool is how you get a slow seller. Not because the engine cannot run, but because the market is cautious about the future it represents. If you understand that, you understand the whole list. These are not always the worst engines. They are the hardest deals to justify when buyers care about resale, support, and risk more than speed. If this helped, subscribe for more grounded outboard truth. Drop a comment. Which one do you still trust, and what proof would you need before buying? Like this video to keep this kind of breakdown visible. Next, the engines that sell fast even in a cautious market.